morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on the power of telling your story. Peter Dew's my name, and I'm a public speaking trainer and coach. And my story is that of a person who stutters with fear and nervousness around public speaking, so avoiding. I now don't avoid public speaking, and I've learnt to deal with my stutter, deal with my fear, and now I help you guys out there, other people in workshops, in coaching, to find your voices and share your messages powerfully, convincingly, and confidently. That's my story. This workshop, this webinar is about the power of telling your story. It's not about how to tell your story, the methodology. That's a different webinar, a different topic. But many people ask me, why should I tell a story? Here's the data, here's the numbers, here's the facts. That should be enough to convince people or to influence them to follow me or to accept the change that I'm asking them to do. So why tell stories and the power of telling your story? You've got my contact details. You know how to reach me if you have further questions. In terms of participating, questions as we go, take notes. I record this webinar. I'll make it available to you as we go. And apply the knowledge to your own particular circumstances. Do you tell stories? Do you avoid telling stories? Do you need to learn the art of storytelling as part of your presentation skills, as part of your influence, persuasion, maybe selling an idea, just the power of the story? So this one is a little bit about the power and why tell a story. What am I going to cover? Why tell stories, the need to create emotion, the advantage of sharing your struggle or someone else's struggle, unique intellectual property, that's stuff that you know. The concept of framing your stories for different audiences and collecting stories everywhere, and that concept of a signature story. So quite a few points to cover. So I'm going to move through them fairly quickly. So why tell stories? This comes from Stanford University. If I was to take away any visuals, in fact, why not? And take the notes back, assuming I've handed out notes or a textbook, and I talk to you for 30 minutes, 1 hour, then 10% retention rate is the best you're going to get. 1 in 10 people you've just spoken to for an hour are going to remember what you've told them. So this is just speaking. If you add visual images, so PowerPoint's back, I do a handout, I move over to a flip chart. I've got a flip chart in the background there that I won't use on a webinar, but I do use in a workshop. I'm tripling the retention rate to 30%. Bad news, but 7 out of 10 still do not remember what you've said. So you've invested an hour, you've put together a powerful workshop. It's going to be really important to the business, to the safety, to the health and well-being, to the productivity, and 7 out of 10 are not going to recall what you've said. If you tell a story with examples and it creates an engaging emotional connection, then 70–75% of people are going to retain what you've said. This is why we tell stories. It's a way of helping people remember what you've said. So just I guess a catchphrase that you can use and that I use and most people in the training industry use. People don't remember much of what you've said. They remember how you make them feel. So the stories help you create an emotional connection. They help your audience feel that they can do this. There is light at the end of the tunnel. They now see a way, excuse me, through their difficulty. So there's some data, some facts from Stanford University as to why we should include stories in our public speaking, in our workshops, in our training. And here's a few quotes. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me. Take me on the journey in your story. Help me feel your pain. Involve me and I learn. So that's Benjamin Franklin. And of course, when you involve your audience through storytelling, you can inspire, persuade, educate, and transport them with your story. Part of my workshop is I show a video of myself before I had speech therapy. And it's an emotional video, and it creates that visceral, that gut, deep down response within people. And people then look at me, look at the video, and they say, wow, Peter, what you've shown me is that if you can do this public speaking, I can as well. I now know that I've got the skills, the knowledge. I just need the courage to face my fears and do public speaking. So my story actually helps people change their behavior. So as I said, people won't remember much about what you've told them. They'll remember how you feel. So stories help this. I work a lot with engineers, geologists, accountants, scientists, and what they have is lots of facts and data and how to and statistics and information, return on investment. So as they give all of these information, the audience retention rate is really, really low. So this is about having an impact when you speak or when you train. You conduct a training session or a facilitation or a workshop, or you speak at a conference because you want something to happen. And part of something happening is the audience needs to know what your call to action is, what you want them to remember. And if you give them lots of data without that retention, then you've had little impact as a speaker or trainer. So just giving data is not enough. We call that going to the head. Yes, you need the data, but it's going to the gut that helps people remember. So the best stories come from the heart rather than the head. And when I teach storytelling, and this is not teaching you how to tell storytelling, but this is getting you on board, I hope, as to why you need to start using stories. I ask people to relive the story as opposed to retell the story. So when you relive, you transport people back to the incidents, the struggle, the difficulty, the tough place that you were, and you share the strategies that you used to become successful. So rather than relay it, it was 1995, there was myself and 3 other people. This is telling the story. Rather than tell it, relive it. So go back and share the emotion, make the emotion palpable, because it's the emotion, the visceral response, that helps people remember and buy into what you're saying. So the story helps with emotional transportation, and the best stories come from the heart. So it's not about thinking and scripting and writing a best-selling story. That's if you're writing a best-selling book. So often they just come from the heart extemporaneously, and people can tell that you're just authentically and genuinely sharing that story from the heart. So good stories to use are about your personal struggle. Something that's an outlier, something that's a little bit different. Were you the odd one out? Were you treated differently? Did you succeed despite adversity? These stories have emotional impact. Welcome, Casey. We've just got underway. We've got about 5 people on the webinar. I am recording the webinar, by the way, so those of you who've missed out or wish to review any of the content, this is available. So where do stories come from? Your personal struggle, or maybe someone else's personal struggle that you were involved with. You may be a financial advisor, you may be a nurse, and you've seen someone transform by following your advice, your steps, your recommendation, and the impact that person's had. So if it's not your own personal struggle, it's someone else's personal struggle that you may be sharing. So were you the outlier? Were you treated differently, unfairly? And despite barriers put up, did you still succeed? So despite my inability to speak, I still managed to get my university degree. Despite my headmaster telling me to go and get a job on the timber mill or on the main roads, not going to university, don't waste your time. Despite that, I was able to go to university, get my degree, and get my job in my chosen profession. So if I'm talking about facing adversity, if that's the purpose of my presentation, then I've got all those stories that I can use. So stories are everywhere. But here's another reason why we share our stories, why we should use stories. They are your unique intellectual property. Morning, Claire. Morning, Tanya. They're your unique intellectual property. People cannot say to you that that is not true, that that won't work, because you've done it. It's your evidence that this way of doing things, this change management process you're talking about, works. Classic example, I was working with a lady with the Kidney Foundation of Australia, and she was presenting at a Northwest remote and rural medical conference. And her finding was, it was in the area of diabetes. Her finding was the biggest issue facing Aboriginal women with diabetes is who's going to look after their kids when they die. Now, she's talking to a group of diabetes educators, pediatricians, diabetes doctors, GPs that manage diabetes, and this is something new. So she's going to ask these doctors to check into the patient's mental well-being around diabetes. And she knows they're going to say, but hang on, this is a stupid idea. If they exercise, if they monitor their blood sugar, if they eat well, they'll manage their diabetes and everything will be fine. But her core message is you need to check into the mental well-being and the stress of the patient with diabetes. And so how does she handle those objections? She just quotes the stories because she interviewed 300 Aboriginal women with diabetes. And what she can say is, well, I just spoke to Mrs. Jones, and here's Mrs. Jones's quote. I can't worry about whether I'm eating well or exercising. I'm just so worried. I'm so racked with guilt, so stressed around who's going to look after my grandchildren when I'm unable to because of my diabetes. And then the medical profession may come back and object and say, well, no, that's not the right thing to do. If we look after the blood sugar level, exercise, if they follow the regime, the insulin that we provide them, they'll be fine. Let me tell you what Mrs. Smith said. Mrs. Smith said, I'm really worried about my diabetes and the impact it's going to have on me when I can no longer look after my children. My husband can't look after my children. My children rely on me. I'm really worried and concerned. See how no matter what people say to you, you have that intellectual proof. You have that story that in the face of objection comes through and says, no, no, this will work. If you're in the mining sector and you want to do something innovative, something new, creative that hasn't been done before, a good way of getting people on board around you is to find another mining organisation somewhere else in the world, maybe Canada, who've done a similar thing with success. And when all the experts, the engineers and the geologists say, well, that's a stupid idea, Peter, that's not going to work. Well, let me share with you what the Canadians are doing, and they've increased productivity by 20%. So you can use that to persuade people. That's the power of stories. It is your unique intellectual property. It's your lived experience when you're dealing with people in crisis, when you're dealing with families that are struggling with someone with a disability, and you've been able to help them and come through, and all the powers to be say, that won't work, that's wrong, that's not right, that's not correct. You can say, well, let me share with you what happened. It's your unique intellectual property. Sorry to labour on about that, but this is one of the powers of telling your stories. I want to talk to you about framing stories. So just think of a picture frame, but use the story as your picture. And those of you in West Australia, and this is not a good picture, this is a picture of Cottesloe Beach. Now, let me say I'm talking to a group of people and I want to highlight a different aspect. I'm going to pick a different subset or a different aspect of the story for that audience. So I'm just using this visual picture because we're on a webinar to illustrate the concept of framing. So I'm going to talk about the concept of framing and sub-framing a picture. You do the same thing for your stories. I've taken a subset of that picture, and maybe we're talking about one of the most creative places, nice places to watch a sunset in West Australia. A sunset go down over the Indian Ocean, which for over east is not a usual thing. And sitting and having a beautiful meal at the Indiana Tea Rooms, which I believe is being redeveloped at the moment, across Cottesloe Beach. I'm using that subset of the picture to highlight one message about watching the sunset while having a beautiful romantic dinner, looking at the sun go down across the Indian Ocean at Cottesloe Beach. That's a subset of that bigger picture I showed you before, the bigger story, the overarching story. Cottesloe is not the world's best surfing beach. It's probably equal to Bondi, but it's a great little body surfing beach, and a lot of young people go there and just like to body surf. So I've taken just another frame or a subframe of that picture, that story I showed you of Cottesloe Beach. So I'm framing it for a different audience. Really family-friendly beach. There's not a lot of waves. The sand is really nice in Cottesloe Beach. It's pristine white. It squeaks under your feet. And great place to take the kids, especially early in the morning. In the afternoon, more waves start to come in. And it's a beautiful family-friendly beach. So if I'm going to target my audience as families, I'm going to subframe my particular story. And still Cottesloe Beach, another subset, great place to play sport. The beach volleyball nets are up all summer, and picnic, volleyball, exercise, and young people love to go there. So I've just framed that picture 4 different ways. So my story that I started with as someone who stutters, who now does public speaking, I went into a little bit of a subset. So my whole story is around my journey from being unable to speak, elective mute, to being a public speaking trainer. Now I want to talk about overcoming barriers. So I'm now doing a subset, a different audience. And I spoke about one little bit of my story where my headmaster told me not to go to university. He said I couldn't succeed. He said, you need to get a job on the main roads or the local timber mill. But I went to university. I got my university degree and I got a job in my chosen profession. That's a subset of my entire struggle as a person who stutters that I can use to talk about perseverance, overcoming barriers, taking risks and getting out of your comfort zone. So this is the concept of framing. So when you have one story, you can frame it for different presentations. You highlight different aspects. Any questions at the moment? Just type in the Q&A. All right, how do you know which stories to use for which audience? That's a really good question, Sarah, and that is the framing. So one of the things I get speakers or trainers to do is move metaphorically into your audience's footsteps. So who are you speaking to? A group of nurses, a group of disability workers, a group of engineers, a group of doctors, just the general community. And what story is going to make most impact with them? The stories I tell to people with disability who work in the disability sector don't work with engineers and geologists. They want more factual stories. They want stories around health and safety, around the importance of safety messages. When I work with accountants and financial planners, they want stories around financial planning. And the story I use is my father, who died without a will, and I, as the eldest son, became the executor of my father's will and had to help my mother unravel the affairs because there was no will. Financial planners will talk about the importance of a will. So that's, you try and find the story or the aspect of the story that helps connect with the particular audience you're speaking to. Moving on, build a bank of stories. Stories are everywhere. Or build your library of stories. They're anecdotes, and you can also collect cartoons and quotes and metaphors. So when I said get in your audience's mindset, I use a metaphor, native North American Indian, walk 30 moons in your enemy's moccasins. So I use that to illustrate the importance of getting into the mindset so you have the right stories, the right message. One of the biggest issues is when the speaker does a really good job sending this message and the audience is here expecting this message, and there's a mismatch of what's being sent and what the expectations are. So that's the importance of you knowing your audience, picking the right stories and the right message so there is a match with what you are saying and what your audience is expecting. Stories are everywhere. So I've shared stories with you today. Different stories, my stories, the story of the ladies who worked in diabetes and had to speak, the Kidney Foundation, and had to speak at a conference. That's a story I collect to illustrate a point. Walk around with just a little notepad, and when you read, hear, see something, then just write it down. I wrote a blog recently. I've just come back from Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, so the old northeastern Europe above Poland. And one of the things we have a lot of there is, beetroot. Beetroot soup, beetroot salad, beetroot risotto, beetroot juice, beetroot. One day I had a beetroot salad. I like beetroot. Eating the beetroot, I noticed there was some pickled fish. I hate pickled fish. So I asked about it, and it's a Latvian specialty. So not wanting to offend anyone, I had to deal with the pickled fish, the unexpected fish in the beetroot. Now I make my point. So as speakers, we're going to get unexpected questions, objections, pushback, and we're going to have to deal with them on the run. The same as I had to deal with the pickled herring in the beetroot. We need to learn to deal with whatever happens, whatever comes across our training room, our conference presentation. We need to be adaptable, resilient, agile, and be able to deal with those unexpected things. So the blog was titled, "What Happens When the Fish Jumped Out of the Beetroot Salad?" Little story, a point that's relevant to all speakers and trainers. Build your bank of stories. What's that signature story that you have? That story that always has impacts, creates a tear, creates the emotional impact, that visceral connection. I spoke about when I show my video of me before I had treatment for stuttering, and many people cry, they feel emotional, and they understand the struggle that I had. And this is my signature story that works every time. When you're trying to make a point, whether it's around resilience, whether it's around mental well-being, whether it's around the importance of health and safety, whether it's around perseverance, whether it's around time management, whatever your topic is, what is your signature story that you can call upon all the time? You can have multiple signature stories. Some resources, you'll get these in the recording that I'll email you. Nancy Girarte is an expert on speech structure. She has a book and she's got a really good TED talk. So she's talking about the use of story, as does Steve Jobs in his Stanford University graduation speech. And he says, let me tell you 3 stories. And each of the 3 stories makes a point. If you don't want to watch the replay of the webinar, I understand it's 30 minutes long, send me an email. Peter, can you send me the links to those 2 YouTube videos that you spoke about? I'll be quite happy to do that. So once again, the art of the business story, and there is a line missing, there should be a line there. The art of the business story, and please understand that we're not talking about, there's a line missing there. We're not talking about bedtime stories. We're talking about stories for business that move people, change people, help people remember. So you still need the data. You still need your return on investment, your facts, your numbers, your risk, your ratios. These appeal to the head. The stories, the successes, the overcoming adversities, the triumphs, family that was in real struggle that you connected, the person who thought they wouldn't be able to retire and survive and the financial planner has helped them. These appeal to our heartstrings, our gut, our visceral response. You need the 2 together, and these are the ones that inspire, engage, and have impact. If you want to know more about storytelling, then there's a really good book, Stories for Work, from Gabrielle Dolan and Yamidi Naidu. I can send you the reference for that book as well if you're interested and you want to make stories and storytelling a greater part of your communication, your training, your presentation skills. So wrapping up, we know why we tell stories. People remember stories. They don't remember data. They don't remember just pictures. They need the story. It helps create emotion. Struggles are a great way to create that emotion. It's your unique intellectual property. You can use one story in multiple ways, and part of this is framing it for different audiences or framing it for different messages. Collect stories, they are everywhere. Remember the fish that jumped out of the beetroot salad? And what's that signature story, that one that always works? And you may need multiple signature stories. Lots of workshops coming up. Presentation skills in Perth on Friday, off the cuff next week. Off to Darwin, if there's any Darwin people on. 4 workshops as part of October Business Month, the Northern Territory October Business Month. We're running 4 workshops. Down to Bunbury, more workshops in Perth in November. Next webinar, 10 steps to help you prepare for every presentation. This is like a checklist that you can use to make sure that you nail every presentation, 15th of October. Can I encourage all of you, as we wrap up, start to tell stories. I have run a webinar in the past on how to tell your story, the methodology of storytelling. This is just to compel you or to convince you that storytelling is a necessary tool that every trainer, facilitator, public speaker should have. So have a great week, and I look forward to hearing from you about your stories. Bye for now.